Welcome to the book of Malachi. If you have been watching all of our videos, which I hope you have, congratulations for making it to the last book of the Old Testament. That is an accomplishment to go through these videos. Thank you so much for following. So let's get in and talk about Malachi for just a second here. Like a lot of these prophets that we see, these smaller books, we don't know a lot about Malachi himself necessarily. In fact, the Old Testament Study Manual said this about him. It says, as with so many of the prophets, little is known of the life of Malachi, apart from what can be learned in his book. Malachi lived after the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, and is believed to have been a contemporary of Nehemiah. The book was probably written about 400 years before the birth of Christ. So they estimate this book around 430 BC, basically. So this is the Persian period of Jerusalem and that area. So Persia is in control. They're the ones that destroyed Babylon and got rid of them, and so Persia is still in charge. Now, Lehi and his family left Jerusalem in 600 BC, nearly 200 years before the time of Malachi. So the Nephites, therefore, could not have obtained the words of Malachi except from the Lord. The plates of Laban would not have contained them. So this is just something to think about for LDS people. The Book of Mormon starts at 600 BC, or right around there, basically. So just before the exiles of Babylon. The first exile of Babylon was 597 BC. So they probably got out of town just before Babylon came in and started to really exile people out of Jerusalem. There's a good chance Lehi would have been part of that exile, in fact. So they're gone. So as far as like the Book of Mormon, it's gone. Malachi is 200 years after Lehi leaves Jerusalem. So the words of Malachi wouldn't exist on the plates of Laban, the brass plates that they took in the beginning of the story of in the Book of Mormon. So this is again, this is around 400, 430 AD, basically somewhere right around there. So Malachi is one of the last of the prophets in time-wise. Him and Nehemiah are kind of that end piece. They're during the Persian period. And then we'll get into the intertestamental period. And what that is the period of time, this gap, basically, between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. So there is a big gap that happens there. And so we'll talk about that after we finish Malachi. But here in Malachi chapter 1, we're going to, again, spend some time talking about problems that the Jewish nation is going through. So they're back in Jerusalem. They've been rebuilding the temple. So the temple of Zerubbabel. So this is during the Second Temple period of Jewish history. But they've gone back to idolatry. They've kind of changed some of their ordinances. Unfortunately, there's some corrections that need to be happening with the people, basically. So that's what we're going to get here in the book of Malachi. So verse 1, the burden of the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi. Now realize when you think of like the Joseph Smith translation, there are no revisions of it. He didn't do a lot towards the end of the Old Testament. So we didn't see a whole lot there. He kind of jumped into New Testament, did more there, and then started doing the Old Testament, but didn't quite make it all the way through. So there's not a lot of revisions from the JST in book of Malachi. Verse 2, I have loved you. So this is the word of the Lord to the people. Saith, I have loved you, saith the Lord. Yet ye say, wherein hast thou loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother? Saith the Lord, yet I loved Jacob. Now this is interesting, this interplay we're going to see. Okay, so think about this idea, not quite like a court case, but kind of like that, where it's like God and the people doing this back and forth. So God's like, I loved you. You were amazing, and I wanted to be with you. And they're going, but when have you done this? So it's almost as if God is trying to prove to the people that he's really there for them. It almost sounds kind of like that, like it's the Lord trying to prove to the people that he loves them and is there. So let's look at this idea. Okay, think of this book. Oh yeah, I was going to say, this is kind of like that back idea. In fact, one of the notes I had in here is just looking at from the idea of a marriage covenant, you can think of Malachi as the marriage counseling. So that's probably a better way to think about this rather than a court case is marriage counseling. So Malachi is the counselor, and the Lord is the groom, of course, and the people are the bride. If you think of the analogy from Isaiah, so this is like the bride complaining to the therapist, going, "My husband doesn't love me anymore. He doesn't take care of me. He doesn't bring me flowers. He doesn't say I love you." And the groom's going, "What are you talking about? I say it to you all the time." "Oh yeah." So this is kind of like a couple's quarrel type idea. Is a good way to think about the book of Malachi. So that's what we're saying. They're saying here. So like in verse 2, "I have loved you, saith the Lord. Yet ye say, wherein hast thou loved us?" So that's that back and forth. So verse 3, he goes on to say, "And I hated Esau and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness." So when we look at this more, the Old Testament Study Manual points out the word hated in Hebrew means to be loved less than someone else, not to be disliked with bitter hostility. So what they're saying is Jacob was the favored son. Esau was not the favored son. That's kind of what it's talking about here. So Jacob's more loved than Esau. So continuing on, they say Esau was the brother of Jacob, who became Israel, father of the 12 tribes. Students of the scriptures know that the Lord hates the sin rather than the sinner. But when people array themselves against the Lord, against the Lord as Esau and his descendants, the Edomites had done for centuries, the Lord withdraws his blessings. In this sense, Jacob was loved and Esau hated. So just if you're not familiar with this story, of course, Jacob and Esau are brothers. They were twins, basically. Esau was born first, and then Jacob came out second. So Esau's technically the older of them, but Esau sold his birthright to Jacob for a pot of cereal, some porridge, basically. That's the story. You get back into Genesis, it'll go over that more. And there's some speculation as to how that story really works out. Go watch our videos in Genesis to learn more about that. But the whole idea was Esau gave up his birthright and Jacob took it and did something with it. And Esau has hated him ever since. And Esau taught his descendants to hate Israelites. Now, there wasn't much animosity there because Esau's people were living around the land of Canaan, Palestine area for a long time, while Israel was in Egypt. They moved to Egypt to be saved from the droughts and the famines, and then they got turned into basically prisoners, slaves of Egypt for a couple of centuries under another subsequent pharaoh after Joseph. And then Moses had to come save them from Egypt and bring them out, and then they came back. And the Edomites, ever since Israel has been back in Palestine, the Edomites have been one of those groups that keeps trying to do like insurgent warfare, little terrorist attacks into Israel to take care of them. They've never been successful at defeating Israel. Even when they partner up with other groups, they've never been good at defeating Israel. In fact, they reveled in the destruction during the Babylonian period. They kind of went in and raided Jerusalem and other things back then. So you can see that as we look at the book of Jeremiah and some of those other books as well. We see that story play out. So Esau is not the favored one because Esau is constantly pushing against the chosen people of God. And so God's like, I'm not going to tolerate this. So Esau's been destroyed. So continuing on here, so complete was the rejection of the Lord by Esau's descendants that they came to symbolize the prophets, the wickedness of humanity in general. Before Malachi's time, they were known as Edomites or Idumeans, and their place of habitation was known as Edom. These people, if I remember correctly, the Edomites lived in the area of oh man, I just forgot the name of the little area that's there now, but it's where the temple built into the wall of the mountain is. They lived in the mountain, like not just up in the mountains, but in the mountain. They built their homes into the mountain. They carved out caves and built them into their Petra. That's the name of the place. It was featured on Indiana Jones, The Last Crusade. That area, which is in the nation of Jordan today, I believe is where the Edomites settled. They lived over there literally built their homes into the wall of the cliffs, basically. I think so. I think that's where they were, because it's either them or that's one of the descendants of Lot that did that. But I think it was the Edomites that did that one. Verse 4, so whereas Edom saith, we are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall build, but I will throw down. And they shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever. So we remember in here, the people think they can build and take care of themselves and don't need to follow God. They're like, oh, if God destroys us, we'll just rebuild our cities and start over again. But he says here basically, nope, you're not. You can rebuild, but I'm going to destroy it again. You're not going to be successful at this. Basically, you're going to be punished for your wickedness. They will see a distinction between them and Israel is another thing that's pointed out in this idea, the border of wickedness. Okay, there's a distinction between Israel and Idumea or Edom where they lived. One side is blessed of God, the other side ruined by God. We could think of the idea of when Israel entered the promised land between the two mountains and the people calling out cursings on one side and the blessings on the other to point out agency. So this is that kind of a similar analogous idea. If you remember when Joshua brought the people in, they went through the valley of decision, which is the valley, if I remember right, they're going back towards in the Battle of Armageddon when the Mount of Olives splits. They're going to be going over that direction again. So if you remember this from the Old Testament, you got to go back into, I believe, well, it's the book of Joshua is where you'll probably find this story. When Joshua brought the Israelites over the river, the Jordan, basically, into the land of Canaan, so where the Palestinian area is today, where Israel and that area is right now, when they came over, he sent the priests, half the priests up on one mountainside, the other half the priests on the other mountainside, and the valley in between is where the people went. So one half of the priests were announcing blessings on the people, the other half were announcing cursings on the people if they didn't keep the commandments. And so this became this idea of the valley of decision, where it was contrasted. Are you going to follow God or are you going to not follow God? The choice is yours, but here's the blessings you get if you follow God. Here's the cursings if you don't follow God. That's basically what they did, is they entered into the valley to remind the people their agency is important. And are they going to follow God or not? That's the whole point of this life. And so that's kind of the same idea. There's a separation of righteous over here, wickedness over there, kind of an idea. So verse 5, continuing on, and your eyes shall see, and ye shall say, the Lord will be magnified from the border of Israel. A son honoreth his father, and a servant his master. If then I be a father, where is mine honor? And if I be a master, where is my fear? Saith the Lord of hosts unto you, O priests that despise my name, and ye say, wherein have we despised thy name? So this is like having the children in the marriage. Now here the dad's going, where are you doing your duty as a son to me as the father? And they're going, what are you talking about? We did worship you. We did obligations to you. And he's like, no, you technically did it, but you didn't do it with full purpose of heart and mind, basically. So God's pointing out the pattern, but is Israel pushing back that they were not that way? Here's the thing to look at with this is the priests are mad. They're going, but we did obligations to you. We sacrificed, we prayed, we did these things. And God's going, yeah, you technically did, but it was hollow. You didn't do it with full purpose of heart. You just went through the motions. And that's the problem here. And so Israel's getting a little upset over all this. Now you have to realize it's the guilty that get upset. Okay? If you feel offended, there might be some guilt. And that's why you're offended, because you'd have to either admit you were wrong, which is against your pride, or you'd have to basically try to argue with them to prove you're right and they're wrong, which is where that offense comes from. But that would be to try to hold on to your pride and not look at the truth. Now, verse 7, it says, Ye offer polluted bread upon mine altar, and ye say, Wherein have we polluted thee? In that ye say, The table of the Lord is contemptible. So this is now God pointing out, yes, you offered bread, but you offered polluted bread to me. You didn't take the time to do it the right way. You didn't put your heart and soul into this. That's part of the problem here. So the Old Testament study manual says the priests and Levites of Malachi's day were mocking God by offering sacrifices to the Lord with sick, blind, and lame animals and calling them acceptable. They had no reverence for what they were doing. The Lord told them, I have no pleasure in you, neither will I accept an offering at your hand. They were selfish and worldly, and not one of them would kindle a fire on the hearth of the altar unless he were paid for it. The Lord had been insulted. The table on which the offering was made was polluted. The offering itself was contemptible. Such action, Malachi promised, would result in cursing rather than blessing. So that's his whole idea. They're technically offering the sacrifices. But the point of the sacrifices is offering your best. You offer the first of your flock, the lamb that is a firstborn, that is unblemished. They're giving the sickly, the ones that they're gonna die and go off anyways. That's what they're sacrificing to God. The bread, they're using polluted bread. It's not even good bread. It's the bread they don't want to eat. So they're giving to God the things they don't want. The minimum things that they need to, basically. And again, this points to us as a good analogy for us. Do we give God our best efforts? Do we really do our best for God, or do we give him basically the least efforts? Are we helping and actually contributing? Are we truly sacrificing, giving of our best to help God and his people? Or are we doing the bare minimum and barely at that? Do we do it with full purpose of heart, or do we do it because we feel it's the social thing to do? Do we attend church because we want to, or do we attend church because everybody else attends church and we don't want to be seen as a social outsider? There's a difference. Make sure you're attending church because you want to be there. If you don't want to be to church, don't go. To heck with the social side of things. If you don't want to be there, don't go. Go because you want to be there. Okay? So think of that. Take time to read the scriptures, to pray, to study, and go, maybe I should go. Show up because you want to be there. If you're showing up because it's the social thing to do and you don't want to be ostracized socially, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. You're not doing any better than not coming at all. Do it because you want to. That's important. Really want to. Okay? There's that contrast. Are you going to keep the commandments of God or not? Do you want to be blessed of God or not? It's your choice. You can choose either one, but be honest with yourself in the choice that you make. That's important to always look at, okay? Very, very important to look at. And that's what's happening here. So if we continue on here, like in verse 8, it says, And if you offer the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? And if you offer the lame and sick, is it not evil? Offer it now unto thy governor. Will he be pleased with thee, or accept thy person, saith the Lord of hosts? So this is God. Think about this debate, this marriage counseling going on. God's going, you know what? Take the offerings you're giving me and give it to your governor and see if he'll be happy with that. The governor's going to look at this and go, you guys are handing me baloney stuff. You're handing me the worst of the worst. That's not going to help me. And he's like, yeah, so why are you giving it to God if the governor won't even accept it either? So if we think of this idea like the Cain and Abel story, the law of Moses said to bring their best to sacrifice, but they were keeping the best for themselves and offering the unwanted parts. Think back to that Cain and Abel story. Abel was giving his best. Cain was not. Cain was technically offering the sacrifice, but he complained, I don't really know what I'm doing with this. I don't really get this whole sacrifice thing. I'm going to keep the best for myself, and I'll give God whatever I have left over. That's that difference, okay? That's the problem. Hollow religion is worse than no religion. Very important thing to always remember. And that's the story of the scriptures is, do you live a hollow religion? If you don't truly believe it, that's worse than not believing it, honestly. Because not believing it, at least you can't be held back to the law. But if you understand the law and don't live it, that's worse. There's punishment that comes with that. So that's where we're at, and that's why these people are in trouble, because they know better and they're not following the commandments of God. In fact, they don't think they have done anything wrong. That's what's interesting about this. But God will show that they are wrong by telling them to try these kinds of offerings to a governor ruler. The ruler would reject their small offerings and punish them. Then why give these to God? If we did our job as much as we did our calling, would our boss keep us or let us go? That's a good question. If you devoted time and energy to your job equal to what you do for your church callings and responsibilities, would you be fired from your job? Let's make sure we're doing our best. Let's make sure we're doing our best, especially for God. So are we spending more time working for mortal things, or are we spending our time working for spiritual things? Are we favoring the earth, favoring mortality, favoring stuff that can go away, or are we favoring the things of God in our life? That's an important question for us to always be asking ourselves. So now verse 9, he goes on and says, "And now I pray you, beseech God that he will be gracious unto us. This hath been by your means. Will he regard your persons, saith the Lord of hosts? Who is there even among you that would shut the doors for naught? Neither do ye kindle fire on mine altar for naught. I have no pleasure in you, saith the Lord of hosts, neither will I accept an offering at your hand." So basically what he's saying there is, what if God stopped temples and church to just show how much the people are not following him? That's kind of this idea. You're offering stuff, but who's there that could shut the doors? Why are you're not even doing the right ordinances and things? What if we just close up the temple and you can't offer? Yeah. What if God stopped temples? What if God stopped church just to see who would actually keep his commandments still? So God's not happy with the people, and they're barely acting good, let alone actually trying to be good. That's the problem we have in this story. They're faking their religion. They're acting religious, but aren't truly religious. So what if the temple went away? What would happen to them? There's not much happening to them because they didn't worship it truthfully in the first place. So here's a thought to have. Okay, the beauty of this is we have a contrast that fits with what Malachi is talking about here. What happened to your spiritual life during and since COVID? Did COVID help you to go, you know what? I like having my Sundays off. I like doing whatever I want. I'm going to stop. Oh, look, we don't have church. I'm not going to pray anymore. I'm not going to read the scriptures anymore. We're not going to do religious stuff anymore. We'll be socially with, going to parties and do stuff, but I don't know if I believe it. I don't know if I really want to do this anymore. See, COVID was an interesting moment that allowed us a chance to say, are you really going to keep the commandments? If you have to do it yourself, if all the church is come follow me at home and sacrament at home, will you keep it up? Will you follow those commandments? Or are you going to go, sweet, I got a year off from church. I don't have to worry about it. There's a good example for your life. Did COVID bring you closer to God, or did COVID encourage you to have God less in your life? That is a separation. That's exactly what we're talking about here. The people had separated themselves from God, basically. So verse 11, from the rising of the sun even unto the going down of the same, my name shall be great among the Gentiles. And in every place incense shall be offered unto my name, and a pure offering. For my name shall be great among the heathen, saith the Lord of hosts. So this is God making a statement after it, basically laying out his evidence, showing that the priests, his sons, are not taking their religion serious and helping the people out. He says, I won't stand for this. I'm going to be okay after this, basically. So the Gentiles will honor God more than the Israelites. I'm going to go to the Gentiles, and they're going to like me more than you. So the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. So this scripture ties into that latter-day prophecy, The Israelites got the gospel first, and then that changed after Christ's resurrection to the Gentiles would get the gospel second. Jesus came to the Israelites first, and then his apostles went to the Gentiles after that. In the last days, the Gentiles will get the gospel first and then take it to the Israelites second. That's what we're seeing today, basically. So do the people you claim are non-believers worshiping God better than those in your church? That is a great question. Are the non-Israelites doing better worship to God than everybody else? So think about this. Especially, I want to think about this from an LDS perspective, okay? Or you can look at anybody. Take your church. Are non-members of your church worshiping God better than the members of your church? That's really the question that he's asking there. I'm going to go to the non-members, is what he said in verse 11. I'm going to go to the non-members, and they're going to worship me better than you're worshiping me. They're not even my sons, but they're going to believe and worship me more than you will. That's the accusation. Are non-members of your church worshiping God better than your members? That might tell you something. Maybe we need to stir ourselves up to be better, to improve ourselves. Verse 12, but ye have profaned it, in that ye say, the table of the Lord is polluted, and the fruit thereof, even his meat, is contemptible. Ye said also, behold, what a wariness is it, and ye have snuffed at it, saith the Lord of hosts. And ye brought that which was torn, and the lame, and the sick. Thus ye brought an offering. Should I accept this of your hand, saith the Lord? So that's that same idea of, you went, oh my gosh, this is so hard. I got to go to the temple again to do these worships. The priests are like, I don't want to go do this. This is boring. This is terrible. Do I have to go every Sunday to church? Oh my gosh. That's what they're complaining about it, basically, because they want to do what they want to do. They're not having that conviction of, I want to go do what God wants me to do. And again, they're bringing the lame, the torn, so injured animals, basically, and the sick animals. They're bringing the stuff that's going to be rotten and thrown out anyways as their sacrifice. They're bringing the bare minimum. That's the problem. So do we feel church is boring? Do we take things of God for granted in our life? That's the question we need to be asking ourselves. Are we taking it for granted? Are we overlooking the things that God is giving us? Now, verse 14, but cursed be the deceiver, which hath in his flock a male, and voweth, and sacrificeth unto the Lord a corrupt thing. For I am a great king, saith the Lord of hosts, and my name is dreadful among the heathen. So we could really look at this whole chapter and ask ourselves, this is the chapter to compare, are we doing our best? Are we putting our best effort forward in taking care of people and doing the things of God, basically? Are we doing our best or not? That is the challenge. And that's a question you should be asking yourself, and I ask it of myself. Am I giving my best to God? Am I sacrificing the best? Am I giving my time? Am I giving my money, giving of my resources to help his kingdom move forward? Or am I just going through the motions of following God? I'm just doing it because everybody else is, and I don't want to be socially ostracized. I go to the ward parties because it's free food, but I really don't believe. I really don't care. I don't study the scriptures. I don't pray. Which way is it for you? That's what you have to decide. That's the important thing for you to think about. So let's jump over to chapter 2 as we continue the book of Malachi.